Hello, I'm Matt Kreider, insurance advisor at Pet Shower Insurance. Welcome to our podcast series where we uncover the cyber threats facing small to mid-sized businesses and how they can protect themselves. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Michael Brice, president of BW Cyber Services, a cybersecurity strategic consultant. Michael and his team advises and safeguards financial service firms against cyber threats. Michael is a Marine Corps veteran who served in the first Gulf War, and he has worked in the information technology and classified operations space for over the last 30 years and founded BW Cyber 9 years ago. Michael and his team have served as a great resource for us at Pet Shower Insurance. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, man. Happy to be here.
Anytime we hear anything in the news about a cyber attack, it's always a big company. We never hear anything about attacks on small to mid-sized businesses. They just don't make the news. How real is the threat to small and mid-sized businesses, and what methods of cyber attack should these firms be most concerned about?
Yeah, you don't hear about it, and the people who get attacked are very embarrassed to talk about it. I see it every day, and it's actually relatively simple. Usually for the small and mid-market businesses, it's coming through email. It's an email attack, phishing, as you're familiar with, and it's as simple as tricking people into giving up their credentials and then being able to log into their accounts. One of the primary mechanisms we see that small to mid-market companies have not set up or properly enforced is multi-factor authentication. Just the ability to get that SMS text or the push button to confirm you are who you say you are. I would say 99% of the time it starts there.
Sure. And what are the most common methods of attack that you've seen?
There are just generally two forms of attack we see in the small and mid-market, candidly. One is which everybody's familiar with, which is ransomware. And that's basically, I send you a phish, I get you to give me your credentials. Because of that, I'm able to log in as your account. If it's a company that has infrastructure and servers, I download some malicious software into the servers and boom, you're ransomed. And for the small and mid-market companies, often they're not properly backed up, or they think they are and they're not. It's devastating. And even if you pay the ransom, it takes weeks, sometimes months to recover. I think people are more familiar with that. That's what you hear on the news. One you don't hear about that's very prevalent in the small and mid-market is wire fraud. And basically, CFOs and owners are tricked into sending a valid wire to an invalid wiring address.
How do they carry that out?
Usually, again, gets back to multi-factor. They've broken into your email account. They've tricked you into giving your user ID and password, and then they sit in your email and just read your email. And it might not be you, it might be your trading partner. You think of a lot of business to business deals. We deal with companies that have large amounts of commodities that they're buying or selling. And they're waiting to see the owner or CFO or finance person suddenly get an invoice. The smallest I've seen is $60,000. The larger ones I see are over $4 or $5 million. Gone, by the way, gone. And they see an invoice, because they're either in your email or the recipient's email. At the last second, when wiring instructions are sent, they change those wiring instructions. And it's very simple, by the way, to do that. You never know they did it. The sender never knew they did it. And if you're not savvy to this type of attack, you're going to believe the instructions you received in that email are correct. And if there's one takeaway from today's entire podcast, whenever you're doing a wire, pick up the phone and call the person you're wiring. If they give you wire instructions in that email, or if they change previous instructions. That's the takeaway from today's podcast right up front, guys. I don't want to bury the lead there, but that's it in a nutshell. One caveat though, please do not use the phone number in the email. Criminals are going to give you a valid phone number to a criminal who's in the same area code who speaks English, and they will convince you, yes, that's the right number. You've got to call the person from a known number. I see a lot of companies that might even have procedures that say you have to confirm wiring instructions, but it's written on a piece of paper. People haven't looked at it since 2019, because I don't see a lot of people reviewing their cash management policies, or they don't train to that. And so that's really where I see this falling apart. And as we're coming up on the holidays here, I see it when it's before a 3 or 4 day weekend. Everybody's in a hurry, got to get that money out, got to get home, got to buy presents, and just don't think. So a lot of human factors mistakes on top of that. And it goes with just not being aware or reminded of the threat.
So having the policies and procedures in place, but implementing them is key.
Yeah.
And having ongoing employee training to make sure that they continue to abide by those procedures.
The efficacy of training of the things we just talked about is about 1/4. I have seen people that I've actually given this training to. We've changed their wired policy. They must do a physical callback. And then 4th of July weekend comes around. True story. Somebody gets a $700,000 wire and it's through somebody they know. So they trust the email and they forget to do the callback and it's gone.
Wow. What other areas do you see wire fraud being prevalent?
I'll tell you some clever new ways that criminals are actually attacking people in wire fraud that we're going to see in 2025. Have you ever heard of caller ID spoofing? And if not, that's basically where I, Michael Brice, can call Matt Kreider and the caller ID he's going to see coming from me is his name with his phone number. That's caller ID spoofing. Criminals are now using that. It's very simple. There are sites that any one of us, if you knew where they were, could log in and do it. Criminals are now doing that to call the finance team after they've changed the wiring instructions to prevent the finance team from making the outbound call to the counterparty with the counterparty's caller ID and phone number. So what happens is, as an example, Matt, you're getting ready to send BW Cyber a wire. You get an email from me that says, hey, here are the wiring instructions. You look at them, you notice they're new. And then all of a sudden you see my caller ID coming in and you pick it up and I say, hey, Matt, it's Michael. We changed our wiring instructions. Just want to make sure I'm heading out the door. And I wanted to confirm that with you because we need the money. Why wouldn't you believe it? Maybe you would say, Michael, I know your voice. And I wouldn't believe it because I know you. AI, artificial intelligence, has voice synthesization now where in real time, if I can copy just a couple snippets of a conversation with you, like calling you up as a stranger saying, hey, how's it going? And getting you to talk to me for a minute or so, I can then use your voice against you. That's how simple it is.
So I basically have to say, excuse me, I'm going to have to call you back.
Yeah.
To confirm.
Yep. Once you make the outbound call, then you're good. But yeah, and by the way, just to make everybody a little more anxious for 2025, they're now doing this with video. And it's already happened. There was a CFO that was basically spoofed with both the fake voice and the fake video on a Zoom call and convinced the team from another country to send 25 million that was not real. Yeah, those are big numbers too.
Big numbers, a lot of profit. These cyber criminals, is there really any repercussion for their action? Going to jail.
This is the beauty of being a cyber criminal in today's world. These criminals are offshore. So the FBI can't put cuffs on them. If they're onshore, the FBI is really good at tracking these guys down, but they're not. They're offshore. They're in Eastern Europe or maybe in Africa. Our country's not even going after them. So if you think about the classic risk-reward scenario, the reward is unlimited and the risk is zero. And because of that, not only are they emboldened, but they are developing, and this sounds comical, centers of excellence for wire fraud, where they're sharing their experiences and developing newer and better techniques to attack the West.
It's a net industry.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
What do you anticipate in the future, and what are we going to see more of?
I think it's AI-driven attacks. The part that bothers me, I wish I could tell you during this podcast, I don't know how criminals are going to use AI, but I see it again with caller ID spoofing, deep fakes. The other area that I'm not sure if people realize is the emails that are tricking people are so much better written now. They don't have the grammatical mistakes, the typos, or any of that. It's perfectly written. And that's, I would say, causing people to not question things where they would have in the past.
Yeah, we're seeing that on the claim side. They're getting a lot sophisticated. They're getting a lot better at what they do.
Yeah. It's because these criminals, they do know each other. They do communicate and they do break off on their own and go off to business for themselves if they think they can make more money than working from some other criminal boss. It's just amazing.
What's the first thing you should do at business when you discover or you suspect there might be a wire fraud?
There's a site that the FBI puts out called www.ic3.gov, and it's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. In addition to telling your bank, which is what most people do, you should put in a report to the ic3.gov site. And that's how you get the FBI involved in what's called the banking kill chain. If you can get that in within 3 days, you can usually get your money back. The other thing I would recommend, of course, is to call a cyber expert, perhaps somebody like myself. And the issue here is to be able to get a little horsepower behind dealing with these government agencies to make sure that they look at your case. The government is overwhelmed with wire fraud.
So it's not always what you know, but who you know.
Unfortunately, in this case, it is, because we often see that if it's 100,000 or less, many people involved in this process of helping you get your money back don't see it as being that much, because there are a whole bunch of multi-million-dollar ones in front of you. I'm actually working with a representative who's on the Homeland Security Committee to attempt to see if we can get Washington to set up some kind of ransom help desk or center, ransom and wire fraud, by the way, because right now there's really not a single agency that actually does anything about this. There are multiple agencies that do stuff about it. But if you had an attack and you lost a multi-million-dollar wire fraud, there's not a single person or agency, not even the FBI, by the way, even with the IC3 report, where you basically get a help desk ticket and a 1-hour SLA where they're going to call you back and work your case. That's why when I mentioned you go to the bank and then you go to the IC3 report, then you call a cyber vendor who can also help you work the process. We don't have anybody in the government that'll do that with a multi-million-dollar wire fraud. It just goes into a black hole and you hope they get it back through the bank. By the way, not to disparage the banks, but remember, the bank in which you sent the wire from, their primary job is to make sure it wasn't their fault. So the first thing they're going to do is make sure you understand you gave them fraudulent wiring instructions. Now, in order to get your money back, even though you're working through your bank, it's the receiving bank that has the money. You probably don't have a relationship with them. They don't know whether you're a criminal or not. Think about how complicated this gets when you're trying now to deal with multiple counterparties. And most of these criminals, the first thing they're going to do is once that money gets to the second bank, they're going to bounce it to a third bank. And that's when it gets really hard to track the cash. And if you haven't been able to report that to your bank and to the FBI within 3 days, your chances of getting your money back go down exponentially.
So really just have a 3-day window, and this process really needs to get moving.
Yep. It's a 3-day window.
We say cybersecurity is your best form of defense. Sometimes when we talk about cyber insurance, giving you that extra layer of financial protection, the objections I get with some businesses is we have all these protocols in place, we're using them. Why do I need the insurance?
Same reason I wear my seatbelt when I go driving. And what I will tell you, I never go out on the road to get in a car wreck, and I'm a safe driver. Probably half of the events I see, predominantly wire fraud, but sometimes ransom, were human factor errors for organizations that had, I would say, relatively good controls, but people made mistakes and allowed it to fail. And then the other half, I'd say people thought they had good controls and they did not. And this is the part that gives me job security, but it's also a little scary. Criminals are always better at attacking than we are defending. And so every time we think we've locked something down, it seems like all of a sudden somebody finds out a way to break it, which, by the way, I will say multi-factor is still very easy to break. My company, we do testing, we do phishing testing and training. We can still send a phish out and through that phish, convince people to give us their login, their user ID, and their SMS multi-factor code in enough time that we can then take that information and still log in as them and beat their multi-factor protection. So I guess the takeaway there is you're never really protected, unfortunately. And again, that's why I wear my seatbelt when I drive my car, even though I think I'm a good driver.
When you hear about cyber threats, I just get this rising sense of anxiety. My chest gets tight. It's doom and gloom, but anything we should feel good about in this topic?
Yes. And by the way, I literally feel that way. I had a situation, I hope my wife's not watching this podcast, where I gave somebody her credit card not 5 feet away from me, thinking it was Microsoft trying to do a repair. It can happen to anybody. And as a cyber vendor, I know I'm sometimes targeted by criminals because we're actually going after them. But the good news is, unless you're target, unless you're the big banks, most of these attacks, especially for the small and mid-market businesses, are going to be relatively simple. They're going to be an attack based on a phish that's tricking somebody to do something. And if it's wire fraud, which is generally my biggest concern, understanding how that attack comes in and knowing to confirm wiring instructions is going to prevent you. On the other side with ransom, taking some basic precautions and making sure your systems are backed up, which, by the way, most small companies can do now if they're using the cloud, will protect you. So the good news, I would say, is as we proceed into 2025, there are more and more capabilities to help maybe not prevent some of these, but restore quickly.
Michael, it's enlightening as always. I want to thank you for joining us and really appreciate you sharing your expertise on this important topic.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Matt.